Hello and welcome to a presentation on introductory paragraphs and sections. My name is Julia Westlake and I will be your instructor. Thank you for joining me. In this presentation we're going to discuss the various essay structures that we'll be using in this course, introductions, thesis statements, an overview of what the body of an essay should look like, and an overview of what the conclusion of an essay should look like. In this next section we're going to talk about creating the map for your essay, which is going to include thesis statements and essay structure. We'll also have discussions on the introduction and conclusion. Planning for an essay is a lot like planning a cruise. So here we have a map, and as you can imagine, if you had a boat and a bunch of people getting on your boat for a 3-hour cruise, let's say, a lot like Gilligan, then you don't want to get lost for long periods of time like, Gilligan got lost, right? You don't want it to be a 3-hour tour that turns into years on a deserted island. Now, that means that like, our cruise ship director, you need some directions, right? We're going to need a starting point. We're going to need an ending point. Probably going to need to know what kind of things our audience or our people on our cruise want to see. What kind of sightseeing do they want to do? What kind of activities would they like to partake in? How long do they want to be on the cruise? So we've got to plan how we get to where we need to go so that it's safe, it's well within our time restrictions, and it takes our cruise participants where they want to go, through the things they want to see and hear, and then back safely to the harbor where they will disembark. So a lot like a cruise, we too have to have some direction when planning an essay. We need to be guided by a set plan. If our essay is only supposed to be 750 words and we write a 1,500 word essay, instead of that 3-hour cruise, it's now a 6-hour cruise, right? You wouldn't want to be on a 3-hour cruise and then get off and you've got a 6-hour cruise. You might have missed your flight, your ride, other activities you had planned, etc. So you don't want to double the length of the essay. Now, sometimes if it's a really good cruise, you don't mind going over a couple of minutes. So like an essay, if you are limited to 750 words and you just can't pack it all in to be good enough, if you go up to like 800, 850, it usually doesn't matter unless somebody really has somewhere they need to be, right? Now, if an essay has a minimum word count, like I want to be on this cruise for at least 3 hours, aka I need at least 750 words, then you can take as long as you want, so long as you haven't bored your audience, right? So you don't want to get so detailed that they're bored, right? You don't want to take a 3-hour cruise and turn it into an 18-hour cruise. So you want to be reasonable. So if the word count is 750, you don't want to write a 13,000 word paper. You want to keep it reasonable. Okay? So, just like a cruise. So you need to be guided by a set plan. You need to take the reader / the audience on a well-planned trip. Just like a cruise, you don't want to be doing circles in the middle of the ocean. You don't want to be detouring off the beaten path so that you miss all of the scenery they wanted to see. You also don't want to be going into choppy waters, big huge storms that are going to risk your life, and you don't want to be taken on a joyride through things that you'd rather not experience, right? You don't want your cruise ship running out of gas or steam in the middle of the ocean with no food and everybody getting sick. Similarly, as a writer, we don't want to be taking people on detours and unscheduled stops where we just go on rants. We don't want to be taking them through scenery and talking about things that have nothing to do with the topic or the issue that we're addressing, or are somewhat related, but not really. We also don't want to be taking them off the beaten path so much that it's hard for them to find us believable. That's kind of the equivalent of, you know, going off the cruise ship path to waters that look a little more like, are pirates coming for me? Or, should I really be on this cruise right now? What's going on? So, like a cruise ship director, we need to make sure we stick pretty darn close to our plan. We need to make scheduled stops. We need to see the scenery that is well laid out in our cruise plan, our cruise itinerary, which we'll talk about. And you need to have smooth transitions, right? You don't want to steer your boat in through a bunch of icebergs and choppy water and go down like the Titanic. Okay? So when you're planning this cruise, your boat tour, you're going to start with an outline, right? So if you were going to take people on a vacation or a cruise, you would probably outline what it is you're going to do, right? You would say, hey, this cruise is going to take 3 hours. We're going to start at this port. We're going to end at this port. And we're going to see the following 5 things along our way. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And so long as weather's permitting, we're going to see all 5 of those things. And we're going to avoid sinking the ship. And we're going to avoid any unscheduled stops. Okay? Now, we're going to assume that when you're writing your cruise ship itinerary that it's perfect weather. Okay? It's always perfect weather and you can control the weather. So we don't ever veer off course. Okay? So when you're doing this, you've given the audience, the people that are going to board your ship, this itinerary, and you are going to stick to it. Because unlike Gilligan, we're not going to get lost on a deserted island and have to live there for years on end. Okay? So when you are outlining your paper, you're going to begin with that outline, that itinerary, if you will, of what you're going to discuss, where you're going to begin, where you're going to end, about how long it's going to take, and the scheduled stops and scenery along the way. Now, how do you accomplish that as a writer? Well, 1, you use an outline, get your stuff together. 2, you use a thesis statement. And 3, you have a structure or a format that you follow for the essay. So in this presentation, we're going to talk about some of those foundational things so that you, like a cruise ship director, can actually take your audience on the trip that you intend without getting lost, without getting deserted on a deserted island, etc. So come along with me and let's see if we can't plan that cruise out so that you don't end up on a deserted island. When you may think of an essay, you may have a picture in your mind of what it's supposed to look like. Most people think of the traditional 5-paragraph essay. We begin with an introduction that includes a thesis statement. We move into 3 distinct body paragraphs covering each of 3 points, and we do a conclusion, and that's how we do it. However, there are many ways to accomplish the goal of getting your point across. And in this presentation, we're actually going to discuss how we can take various different formats and make a point in a way that fits not only the issue that we've identified, but makes the most sense for our writing style, our strengths, our weaknesses, etc. So in general, when we think about an introduction, we think about sharing a story, a statistic, a startling statement, a quote, humor, rhetorical questions, etc. Some of those things are appropriate for academic writing. Some of them are not appropriate for academic writing. So we're going to cover some of those things. First and foremost, if you share a story and it's personal in nature, for an academic essay, you need to make it where you remove yourself, because we do not want to be writing in first or second person point of view. That means we don't want to be using pronouns like I, me, my, you, your, we. Don't want to be using those things. So if you're going to use a personal story to introduce a topic, we want to make it a little more generic, write it from third person point of view. Statistics are great openers for academic essays, startling statements, as long as they are appropriate to share in an academic environment, or a business environment if you're doing something for business are good. Quotes, as long as they're related and appropriate. Humor, again, related and appropriate. Rhetorical questions you should not use in academic essays unless you are much further down the road towards the end of your program and have a very, very, very good handle on your audience, the instructor, etc. For all intents and purposes, though, forget it, don't use them. You're not having a conversation with the audience. It's not a speech. If you're actually writing a speech and you're going to interact with your audience a lot, using a rhetorical question to introduce your speech topic is perfectly acceptable. In an essay, however, where you cannot interact with the audience, not appropriate. And this is a writing course, so strike that from your idea list. No rhetorical questions. Basically, no questions in the opening paragraph for this class. Okay, so theses, that's part of the introduction. We're going to cover that in a little bit. And you will have body paragraphs or body sections, as we'll cover in a minute, and you will have a conclusion. So, kind of what you expect when you think of an essay. But how do we get our essay to be that map that we want? How do we get our point across? How do we ensure that we don't get hit by writer's block? Well, if you don't already know this, you will find out through this class that there is a formula for writing an essay. It can be very easy, almost like fill in the blank. Not quite like Mad Libs, but fill in the blank type, weaving your ideas together. It is possible, and it is pretty easy. So let's find out more about that. So introductions. Introductions have a specific format that they follow. We have an attention-grabbing statement. Now that might be a quote, statistics, a story. It might be some kind of startling statement, etc. Something to grab the reader and pull them in. Think about the first couple of sentences of a news article that you recently read, or the first couple of statements that come from a news anchor. They want to draw you in. They want to grab your attention. They want to keep you there so that you listen to the rest of what they have to say. Same thing applies to you as a writer. Now, you don't need to get fancy. You don't need to have a huge joke and a crack up at the beginning of your presentation or your essay. But you do need to draw the reader in. You do need to create some sort of interest. Okay, it could be mild interest. You don't need to get fancy and get overwhelmed with it, just some kind of interest. Then you need to have an introduction to the topic. This could be between 1 and 5 sentences in length. You need to introduce the topic. Why is it relevant? Why should I care? What kind of issues have come up, etc. Then we want to have our thesis statement. Now, you'll notice that it is at the end. It doesn't have to be the last sentence. You could have another sentence follow it where you're still introducing the topic or transitioning to the body of the essay. But it is towards the end. You don't typically begin your introduction with your thesis statement. On rare occasions, I've seen it work where you begin your introduction with the thesis statement, but that's really, really rare. Usually it's towards the end or at the end. Now, in order to have a paragraph, you need a minimum of 3 sentences. That applies to anywhere in the entire essay, whether it be the introduction or the body or the conclusion. 3 sentences minimum. So here you see 3 points: an attention-grabbing statement, introduction to the topic, and thesis statement. If you meet those 3 points in your introduction, you have completed a paragraph. Now, the quality of whatever you write depends on you and what you put into each of those sentences. So do make sure if you go for the minimum 3 sentences that you have developed your introduction enough to grab attention, sustain attention, and introduce your topic. When you are writing your thesis statement, we're going to talk about thesis statements in a minute, you really need to give that roadmap. That's where you kind of set the itinerary, the teaser, if you will, for the actual essay. And you're going to follow that roadmap throughout your essay, and we're going to talk about that in just a minute. Now, at the top of this, you see paragraph versus section. Probably all throughout your academic career prior to college, you heard about the 5-paragraph essay. It was probably drilled into your head. You begin with the introduction, then you have 3 body paragraphs, then you end with the conclusion. In college, we don't always have just a 5-paragraph essay. It isn't that we necessarily follow the same format and just expand the body. It's sometimes that we need to develop those 3 paragraphs, those ideas that encompass those 3 paragraphs, into longer sections. And it doesn't make sense to have, 3-page paragraphs, right? Or 2-page paragraphs. We want to give it some breakup so that it's easier to read, it's easier to follow, the flow is better. So in that case, we may still be covering the same topic, but rather than just writing 1 paragraph, we might write 3. So that's a section. So we'll talk about that throughout when we cover the structure of essays, but keep that in mind. You don't just have to write 1 paragraph to cover 1 topic. We'll use things throughout our class and throughout your academic career to give indicators, kind of like road signs, if you will. Like, up ahead, we're going to talk about this, and soon we're going to talk about that. We're going to use formatting to act as road signs to our reader. Big, huge, flags off in the distance that say, hey, transition coming up, or hey, you've entered this town. And we're going to use that formatting to outline if we're using sections versus just, the 3-paragraph body that are standard that you heard about prior to college. So don't be scared. Just know 3 minimum sentences. That should get you through. Now, there's an actual mathematical equation when we talk about writing an essay. Sometimes students get really hung up on, oh, I've got to meet 1,000 words, and they start to get verbose. You begin by writing this really elaborate, long introduction, and then you get your body paragraphs, and you realize in body paragraph 2 that you've already maxed out on 1,000 words, or you wrote a really sparse introduction and first body paragraph, and now you're in body paragraph 2 and you realize there's no way you can get to the word count by the time you end the essay. There's ways to prevent that. This way of balancing your essay can also help with writer's block. It can help you get started. It can help you balance and guide where your essay needs to go. It can help you outline, and it can help you know when you're going too long on a section or you haven't developed it enough. So here's some basic mathematical principles. It's just adding and dividing. That's scary, I know. Use a calculator. It's okay. So here's the formula. The introduction and the conclusion are treated like 1 at first. Then we're going to add that to the number of body paragraphs or sections. The word can be used interchangeably. And that's going to give us our total number of sections. We're going to take the total number of sections and divide the word count by that number. So, and this will give us how many words you need in each body paragraph. Then we're going to divide this number by 2, and this is how many words should be in the introduction and conclusion. I've probably lost you. Come back. I'm going to give you an example. It's a lot scarier sounding than it actually is. It's really simple math. Okay, now that I have your attention back, the introduction and conclusion equal 1. If you have a standard 5-paragraph essay, that means you have 3 body paragraphs. You add 3 plus 1 together, that gets you 4. Let's say your teacher said to write a 1,000-word essay. We're going to take 1,000 and we're going to divide it by 4 because that's how many sections we added. That's going to give us 250 words per section. That means that each body paragraph or body section is going to be 250 words approximately in length. You might go 200 words for 1 paragraph and 350 for the next and like 300 for the third. That's okay. Each section is going to vary a little bit, and that's okay, but they're going to average out to about 250 words. Now, you don't want your introduction and conclusion to be as developed necessarily as your body paragraphs. You want to control them a bit. They serve kind of similar purposes. So we take that 250 words and we divide it by 2, and that gets us to 125 words. Your introduction and conclusion should each be around 125 words. Now you may say, well, Julia, I only got to 100 words in my introduction. That's okay. When you get to your conclusion, you might have a lot more to say, so you might need 175 words or 160 words. It's okay, balance it out between the two, but don't have like a huge 300 word conclusion and a 100 word introduction. You need a little more balance, okay? So try to make them around the same length. Give or take, 20 or 30% in terms of the words. And if you don't like percentages in math, that's okay. Make them around the same length. You can estimate. I trust that. Let's now discuss some facts and some myths about thesis statements. You've probably heard things like, it's just like any other sentence, it doesn't really matter. It can be a vague statement. Has to be the last sentence in the introductory section or paragraph. You can't start writing until you have a thesis statement. It must be one sentence in length. It must have 3 points of support. It only appears in the introduction. These are all myths, okay? So you can pretty much look at these. They have some semblance of truth to each of them, but they are all, in fact, myths. They're fiction. So forget these statements, and let's talk about what thesis statements actually are, the facts. It's a roadmap. Just like we talked about, having our cruise and having a map of the destinations that we're going to go to, your itinerary is kind of set forth by your thesis statement. It's that catchphrase and that sentence that tells you, this is where we're going to go. This is why we're going to go there. These are the things we're going to do. It's just brief. It's to the point. It provides you a roadmap. Gets you excited, knows where you're going, you know what to look for. Okay, it directly addresses an issue. So if you remember back to critical thinking, if you've taken it, then you'll know what an issue is. It's a question, usually unbiased. However, if you haven't taken critical thinking, or you need a refresher, or you really struggled with critical thinking, any of those are perfectly acceptable. Please, please, please go back and listen to the Foundation of Arguments video. It will explain a lot about thesis statements, and you really need a solid foundation in what an argument is before you start to write an essay. Okay, so an essay also makes a claim. And if you remember from critical thinking, if you've taken it, if not from the video, the Foundation of Arguments, a claim is basically an educated opinion, right? We're not just going to spout off what first comes to our mind. It's going to be an educated opinion. It's going to provide some premises, which are reasons to support or prove the claim. It's usually one sentence, about 95% of the time. However, if you have a really long essay, it could be multiple sentences. Or if you have a lot to prove, or you have some really lengthy reasons, then it might be multiple sentences. But usually it's one sentence. And for all intents and purposes in this class, you're going to want to keep it to one sentence. There's no reason. Our essay is not long enough for you to really stray from that one sentence. It's always located in the introduction of an essay or speech or presentation. And it's always necessary. Now you might go out to your friend Google and say, is a thesis statement always necessary in an essay or speech? And you might find 1 or 2 websites that say no. In certain cases where you're doing a literary review where self-discovery is part of the assignment, you do not need to have a thesis statement. You will not be asked to do that in your undergraduate program. So everything that you write for school has to have a thesis statement. Further, if you go on to a master's degree program, there are very few instances where you would be free writing a literary review of sorts, where you're having this path to self-discovery and it's supposed to evolve as you write. So most of the time when you're turning in an essay, you've already read the material, your review is known that it's going to be in past tense, so therefore you would need a thesis statement. So when you're approaching this, you should latch on to the idea that you always, always, always need a thesis statement. Whether you're presenting a speech, or you're presenting an essay or a presentation of some sort, etc. You need a thesis statement. That's what you need to latch on to and remember. Don't trust your friend Google. Okay? Also, the structure of the thesis statement must match the writing format being used. In a couple of minutes, we're going to start covering some of the writing formats we're going to use in this course. Your thesis statement needs to match not only your map, the cruise you're going on, it needs to also match your audience, and then the type of cruise you're going on, the structure you're going to use. Okay? Otherwise, it can't be a very good road map or cruise map, if you will. It's also going to be revised many times as you write. Okay, that myth that you have to have it written in stone before you can start writing is in fact a myth, right? You're going to get a draft of your thesis statement. You're going to know some general things like, oh, I think I want to make this claim. I think these are the reasons why. I'm not sure how I'm going to phrase it. You're going to work and rework that statement as you write the body of your essay and as you kind of do the research and get more refined. When you're first outlining and first drafting an essay, your thesis statement should change a number of times and evolve as you write. Further, later on in this course, once you have a rough draft and we go back and reverse outline, and that's just how it sounds, you go back and you outline from what you've written. And when you get to that point where you're matching up things on your outline with what you've written, if you find that you didn't cover something or you covered it a different way than what you wrote in your thesis statement, then you're going to change the thesis statement. You wouldn't change the entire body paragraph or the entire essay to fit the thesis statement. So that's good to remember. You're not stuck with it once you've written it. You can change it. Further, it should appear in the introduction and the conclusion. So it's always got to be in both. So in the introduction, that's where it sets out the roadmap, and in the conclusion, which we'll learn later in the class, that's where we refer back to the points that we actually covered in the essay so that the reader has a nice summary. So you're going to use it twice. It doesn't have to be phrased the same way necessarily, but it's phrased very similarly in both places. So those are good things, fact and myth about thesis statements. Now, there's different types of thesis statements. We're going to have a couple of different examples, and each of these examples is going to match a different type or structure of essay that we could use or write in this course. Here's our first example. In the U.S. alone, nearly 7.1 million children have asthma. Nearly half of this population would experience reduced or no symptoms of this disease if air pollutant levels were significantly reduced. Okay, that's a pretty solid thesis statement. I know my topic, I can guess the issue really quickly, I know kind of my reasons for saying that, it's disputable, so I'm going to have something to talk about. I've got some interest there too. So this particular example matches the Monroes motivated sequence format that we're going to discuss. Let's look at another example. In the U.S. between 1990 and 2000, the rate of juvenile asthma cases increased 22%, primarily due to air pollution levels, and controlling these pollutants is key to improved health for thousands of children. Again, we've got a claim. It's disputable, so we'll have something to talk about. We'll need to prove something. We have some reasons in there, and we have some interest that we've piqued. This particular thesis statement fits the problem-solving format that we're going to discuss. Let's look at another example. Rising levels of traffic pollution, off-gassing from consumer products, and toxic toxic pollutants released by manufacturers directly result in an increased incidence of juvenile asthma. Again, we have a claim, we have reasons, we've piqued interest, we've met the criteria for a thesis statement. Now, this number 3 fits the statement of reasons. This is what we normally think of as the 5-paragraph essay, right? We've got 3 reasons or more, 2, 3, 4 reasons, 5 reasons. We could have 20 if we really wanted to, but we don't want to. Don't do that. You could, but you don't. So keep it reasonable, keep it within the word limits that you have, right? And keep it concise so that your reader will want to keep reading. So these reasons here that are listed, I want to point out that they are falsified research on purpose so that anyone who's listening to this recording does not steal the thesis statement and then attempt to write an essay with it. So some of the facts are true and some of them are fiction. I'm not pointing out which ones they are, but there's made up points of fact in all of my examples on purpose so that those of you who are listening do not copy them and use them in your own papers. Further, if you are in one of my classes, childhood asthma being caused by pollution, childhood asthma and pollution together is off limits as a topic. So don't choose it because I use it as an example throughout all of my presentations and lectures. So not available to you, but if you are in a different class listening to my recording, these are falsified facts. Don't use them. Or do. So the first format we're going to discuss in this presentation is going to be the Monroes motivated sequence. So we have an introduction, we have a need, we have satisfaction, we have visualization, we have a call to action, and then we have, of course, our conclusion. So I want you to kind of note that there are really, if you follow this particular format, you're going to have 6 paragraphs minimum, or 6 sections. And each of those sections or paragraphs is going to address a particular thing. So, and those things are right here numbered for you. It's going to be getting attention, pointing out the need, the satisfaction, the visualization, and the actions. What do those actually mean? Let's look. Okay, so we have Monroe's motivated sequence. Let's look at it in action. We have that introduction, the introductory paragraph, the attention-getting paragraph or section. It needs to meet all the same criteria that we talked about for an introduction, right? It needs to have an attention-grabbing statement, an introduction to the topic, and a thesis statement. So for instance, we might say something like, Americans spend $18 billion annually to treat asthma, with more than half of those funds spent on emergency room visits, according to the CDC. Further, almost 10% of U.S. children suffer from asthma, and many will become one of the 8.2% of adults with asthma. Listen to those facts. They will make you want to care about what is being written about. They make you want to make a connection with your taxpayer dollars. They make you want to make a connection with 10% of the population. That means if you know 10 people, one of them as a child has asthma. If you know 10 people as an adult, right, then maybe one has asthma, or half of them have 0.5% have asthma. So you might need like 12 people or so to have one that has asthma. But those are impactful. That means that you know somebody. There's tons of money being spent to treat this, right? Those are impactful. They draw you in. They create interest. They create buy-in for why this is a problem, why you may want to listen, right? So they're going to create that interest, that buzz. As a reader or a listener, you want to listen to more, right? And then you follow it up with something that introduces the topic a little bit more. You might continue on with these attention-grabbing statements that kind of introduce the topic and then naturally lead into the thesis, which is, in the U.S. alone, nearly 7.1 million children have asthma. Nearly half of this population would experience reduced or no symptoms of this disease if air pollutant levels were significantly reduced. Okay, so we have our statements right there, right? We know that we have a claim, we have some reasons.
Okay, so here we have
and we know
the
that
body
those
section, the
things
first
tell
one,
us
need.
So in
Tell
this
us
section
what
of
we're
Monroe's
gonna
motivated
discuss
sequence
in the
for an essay,
essay,
we're
and
going to
in
answer
what
the
order we're
why
gonna
is this a
discuss it.
serious problem?
And they tell us
Who does it hurt
how
and what is the
you're going to
extent
get
of
to the
the issue?
conclusion.
So
we have
this is
things
kind
like
of when
in
your
the US
values
alone,
meet
nearly
reality,
7.1 million
and we're going to
children have
create a
asthma.
mini argument.
That's a fact, right?
Okay, if you recall
Then
back
we
to
have
the
nearly
foundations
half of this
of
population would
arguments
experience
video, I said
reduced
that
or no
once you create
symptoms
an
of this
argument,
disease.
your
That's a
thesis
claim
statement
for your essay.
Okay, and then
You
we
then
have
go about
if air
supporting and
pollutant
proving
levels
each
were
of your
significantly
reasons.
reduced. And in this particular
Okay, so that's
format,
another kind
we're
of
going to
like
go about that
fact
a
or
little bit
reason.
differently than in the
So
other formats.
here
right?
our claim is
so we're
nearly
going
half
to
of
have
this population
to
would
connect
experience reduced or no symptoms of this
our
disease.
statements with a
Then we have a
mini
qualifying
argument that's going
statement.
to then hold
If
up
this happened,
our
if then,
premises, right?
So here we
and
have
we have
a
the
statement.
nearly
Children who
7.1
suffer from
million
asthma are
children
more
have
likely
asthma.
to
There's
be
some
obese,
buy in there.
bullied,
Some
and
reasons
suffer
why
a variety
you'd
of
want to pay
health
attention
and
to this.
other setbacks that can further
So
delay
when we
their
use
school,
Monroe's
academic,
motivated
and psychological
sequence,
development.
the body
Great.
of our essay is going
Prove
to
it.
be comprised of
Right?
the need,
Because
the
these are
satisfaction,
all
visualization,
things,
action,
right?
and then a conclusion.
They're horrible things that you
Let's
just don't
look
want to hear
more
about
into
your
what
child.
that looks like.
But unless you can prove it, the average reader is going to glaze right over these things and say, oh, well, that's nice. There's lots of kids who are obese. There's lots of kids who are bullied. And there's lots of kids who, have social, academic, and physical delays. Why does it matter? Why is air pollution the big bad bully of this? Gotta go find our facts. We gotta prove that asthma is the culprit. We gotta tie then asthma back to the pollution. So here's how we're going to go do that. We're going to create a need. We're going to outline it. So here, when you're looking for resources or, facts, you go and you tie those to the points that you're making. You don't just haphazardly find somebody that agrees with you and restates the same statements that you do. You go and find proof of those statements. So here, asthma is going to cause a child to be more likely to be obese. Your job is to then go out and find a reference that proves, shows a connection between childhood asthma and the likelihood of obesity. Boom, you have a reference that proves that. You're going to include that in this section. Next point, being bullied. Asthma, being bullied. Find a research article that connects the two. Boom. Now you have your second reference. I know you're like, but I only needed 2 references for the entire essay. Yeah, that's minimum. You should probably try to exceed that if you want to do a really stellar job. And that's what I'm trying to teach you to do, is a really stellar job. So we're going to keep going. The next one is suffer a variety of health setbacks that can further delay their social, academic, and physical development. Go find like a medical journal article or something else that proves that. Then, boom, include that. Then you're going to have another little mini argument. Americans spend nearly 18 billion treating asthma each year. The number is continuing to grow with increased cases continuing to pop up every year. So you might find a news article, you might just kind of throw that out there. You might include a graph that shows that trend going upward year over year, etc. There's lots of different ways to kind of prove that and include, facts in your writing to really establish yourself as, I did my research. I became an expert on this topic. I know what I'm talking about. And that's kind of what we're getting at. You want to follow a format, a structure for your essay so that you create that expert-like aura around you. Right? I call it speaking in your academic voice when you phrase things in a way that sounds more academic in nature. But the format and the structure that you use also helps you establish that academic voice. You'll hear me use that throughout the class, your academic voice, right? Not your casual voice. Okay. So the next paragraph or section that we're going to talk about is satisfaction. So here we're going to present how to solve the issue. And I'm going to glaze over this a little bit because you can go back and read the slides and we're going to cover it later in the class. The third section is visualization.
So present how your solution, the satisfaction, would affect the audience. And in section 4, you're going to present action. This is a call to action. What should be done? How should it be solved? When, where, how? Set some SMART goals, right? And then you're going to go into your conclusion. Now, there's another format that's called the problem-solving format. It differs a bit than from Monroes and from the traditional 5-paragraph essay that we're going to talk about next. So this problem-solving method, it actually starts with an introduction like every single structure we're going to start with. It ends with a conclusion like every single paragraph or essay, not paragraph, essay format that we're going to speak about. But it has a different middle, right? Different body. This one has harms, inherency, significance, and solvency. Here's what they mean. Harms talk about how are we hurt by this. We don't write in first person or second person, but that's the question that that body section answers. Inherency, why does this issue exist? Significance, what is the scope of the problem? Solvency, what can be done to solve the problem? In your final essay, you're talking about a problem at your work or community, etc. These are the kinds of questions that you really need to start asking yourself when you pick a topic. Who's hurt by it? Why does it exist? Why is it significant? How should it be solved? Or you need to go back to Monroes and look through each of the bullets there and see what the answers are to it. Once you kind of outline and get some brainstorming around each of these formats, you'll start to develop what you want to write about, and you'll start to cling to one of the formats. That'll make going through the course a lot easier once you can pick a format. So when we talk about the problem-solving format, we can use the same attention getters as we did with the Monroes motivated sequence, or we can change them up. This kind of lends itself to the same attention-getting statements. They might just be tweaked a little bit in terms of phrasing. Then our thesis statement is different though. Remember that the things that we're going to touch on in the body sections or paragraphs are a little different, so our thesis statement needs to be a little bit different. This one, it says, in the U.S. between 1990 and 2000, the rate of juvenile asthma cases increased 22%. It's a fact. Primarily due to air pollution levels. Okay. That might be a fact. And controlling these pollutants is a key to improved health for thousands of children. That's a claim. So we're taking two seemingly facts, and then we're going to make a conclusion about them, or a claim, right? And so that's where we've kind of ended. So then we kind of say harms, inherency, significance, solvency. Who's it harming? Why do we have the problem? How significant is it? How do we solve it? And that's why the flow of the thesis statement kind of says, okay, how many children does this affect? Why is it affecting them? So we kind of go in that order. What is the significance? Also kind of covered in what you see underlined in blue. And then the claim. So solvency, how are we going to solve it? Well, controlling the pollutants is going to help solve it. How are we going to control the pollutants? That's the next area that you go to. All right, so let's look at how the body shapes up here. So harms, who's hurt by this? In this section, we would create like a mini argument. Like children who suffer from asthma are more likely to be, again, obese, bullied, and suffer a variety of health setbacks. See how these kind of line up together a little bit? You could use the same kind of research. Remember, you tie the research in. So obesity being tied to asthma. Find a resource. Bullying being tied to asthma. Find a resource. Variety of health, social, academic, physical development issues. Find a resource. So those sections, those first sections in Monroe's motivated sequence and the problem-solving format are pretty much the same. They just might be called something different. Next, then, we're going to transition to inherency. Why does this problem exist? Which is different than where Monroe's motivated sequence goes. Right, so here we're going to have a different mini argument. It's going to be nearly half of all juvenile asthma cases and complications are due to rising pollution levels that are the result of lax environmental laws. Dun dun dun!
Oh my gosh, lax environmental laws. What are we to do? So we're going to go find a resource that talks about pollution causes asthma to be more severe. We're going to talk about pollution causes asthma complications like respiratory illnesses. And maybe we could go out and find something that says pollution laws are too lax. Maybe we go find, people that are really advocating for better control over pollutant levels. Maybe we go find journal articles. Maybe we go find allergy and asthma doctors that are writing journal articles about pollution in the air and how, if we could just get a handle on them, it would be better for so many children and adults. So that's what inherency would talk about. Next, we have significance. What's the scope of the problem? How big is it? How many people does it affect? How much does it cost us, right? Remember we covered those things in our thesis statement? Well, here you get a chance to address those. We also covered it in our introductory, our attention-getting statement, right? There's a reason we chose those attention-getting statements. So how many children are suffering? How much money is spent on it? Why is the number of sufferers increasing? And where are we going to be in 10 years if we don't do anything? Remember, we've got to motivate. This may not be called the motivated sequence. It's called the problem-solving format. We've got to know the scope of the problem in order to solve it, which is where we logically go next. How to solve the problem. So here we're going to propose a little mini argument about how to solve the problem. So we might say something like Congress should pass a bill requiring traffic emissions to be reduced by 20% within the next 10 years. So state what this would do for the current sufferers and the average American. Why is 10 years reasonable? 20% as compared to when? So you got to set a baseline. It's got to be reduced 20% as compared to emissions levels today, or compared to 1980 or 1990 or 2000 or what, 2010. Set a baseline and then make sure you qualify it. And then give an example of where someone who successfully did this, like reduced emissions levels in a 10-year period, and what the results were. Or you might even talk about cities that really were able to clean up their air pollution and how it helped asthma sufferers. The more direct connections you make between your argument and how logical it is, the better off you will be. So now that you've solved the problem, you go back and then you conclude with your conclusion. So it's the same for Monroes and for problem-solving format. The next one is the statement of reasons pattern. Now this one is the classic 5-paragraph essay, or we're going to call it the 5-section essay, or more, depending on how many reasons you have. But this, if you're going to think about it, is the classic 5-paragraph essay. This is the pattern that you would associate with that. So we start with an introduction. We have, a body with 2 to 5 justifications on the stance that you've chosen, and a conclusion. And this is one of the most common patterns used, period, for just about any type of writing. So you can really master this type of writing and be in a good place. You'll use the problem-solving format and the Monroes motivated sequence quite a bit when you're doing like multidisciplinary problems, or you're trying to solve community issues, or you're trying to propose solutions to your boss, etc. The statement of reasons pattern is, it lends itself well to the traditional research paper. So, and this one might be where your comfort levels lie. You can use any of the 3 for your final essay. So you can start considering now what you're going to write about and which structure fits your topic the best and how you want to approach the topic. So here, the attention getters can be the same again. It's perfectly fine. So you're going out, you're finding these facts. The attention getters can be the same. Thesis statement needs to be phrased differently because, again, the roadmap of where you're going is different. So this one we have rising levels of traffic, pollution, off-gassing from consumer products, and toxic pollutants released by manufacturers directly result in an increased incidence of juvenile asthma. You can almost hear the dun dun dun.
Remember that I made up my statistics. So, or did I? Did I look them up or did I make them up? I don't know. So, here you're going to take premise number 1, premise number 2, premise number 3, and so on and so forth, and you're going to map them to each of these body sections or body paragraphs. And that's going to comprise your body. Okay? So, the rising levels of traffic pollution, that's premise number 1. That would be your first body paragraph or body section. Off-gassing from consumer products, that is premise number 2. It would go into body paragraph or body section number 2. And toxic pollutants released by manufacturers, that is premise number 3. That's what you would cover in the third body paragraph or body section. Our claim is directly result in an increased incidence of juvenile asthma. So in the first body paragraph, you would be covering rising levels of traffic pollution directly result in an increased incidence of juvenile asthma. It's your topic sentence. Off-gassing from consumer products directly results in an increased incidence of juvenile asthma. Topic sentence for the second body paragraph. Can you fill in the blank what the topic sentence for the third one would be? Toxic pollutants released by manufacturers directly result in an increased incidence of juvenile asthma. It's that simple when you follow this pattern. You don't need to be surprising people. Oftentimes students can tell me that they need to not be so direct when they write their thesis because they want to keep their reader engaged and they want to have surprises along the way so they'll keep reading. Here's the problem. Readers get bored and think that you're off track if you don't provide them with an accurate roadmap. They also can't necessarily follow along if you're consistently surprising them along the way. What should be surprising and shocking and keep them interested are the facts and the resources you go find, not the order you're going to cover things in, the claims that you're going to make, or the reasons you're going to use. Your thesis should outline everything. What's in these body paragraphs and the evidence that you use and stuff should add that shock value, that interest. It should keep your reader going, not the order you cover things in or what you're going to cover. Your reader needs to know that. You need to interest them by telling them those things. Again, you wouldn't go on a cruise if you didn't know where the cruise was going and what stops you would make along the way and what scenery to expect. You would want to get off, though, at the port stops, and you'd want to be surprised and interested by what you see. You wouldn't want to be able to see it all through the brochure. Same thing goes, you wouldn't want to see everything you're going to see in the body paragraphs in the introduction. You'd want little teasers, right? And then once you got off at the ports, the body paragraphs, you'd want to see the full thing and be like, oh, wow, this is so interesting and cool. Then you'd want to get back on the ship through your transition sentence and go to the next port, which is your next body section or paragraph. Then you'd want to be surprised some more, like, oh, I knew we were stopping at this port, this off-gassing from consumer products port, but man, this is so interesting, and look at these statistics and these stories, and this kid that had this thing happen, and wow. Okay, that's how you keep them interested.
Right.
You don't keep them
So
interested
in the
by
statement
keeping them
of
guessing about where
reasons
you're
pattern,
going. Again, like I said,
that
rising
leads
traffic
to
you losing the reader if they don't know where they're going.
That's premise
they need
one.
to know where they're
That's
going.
your body
Have a strong
paragraph
thesis
one or
statement
section
to know where they're
one.
going. So a mini argument for that might be something like rising levels of traffic pollutants released into the air cause a rise in the number and severity of juvenile asthma cases. You can go find various resources that prove those things. Remember, resources are meant to fill in blanks. They are not meant to just agree with you. Okay? Then you have your second premise. Not going to read this to you because we're going to cover it later in class. You have your third premise. You have proof. You have your mini argument. And you have your conclusion that follows that. Now you may be asking yourself, oh man, I get to the point where I can outline it and I can come up with my claim, my opinion, and I can tell you the reasons why I have my opinion, and I can get to the topic statement, Julia. You just made it so easy for me. But now I go to write my body paragraph and I completely fall apart. I get writer's block, I procrastinate, I go bake brownies, I just can't focus. I just can't do this. Well, you are in luck. There is a formula for writing a paragraph. It does not matter which formula you are using to write your essay or which structure you're using, there is a formula. Here it is. You can basically fill in the blanks, not quite like Mad Libs, but you can fill in the blanks. You start with a topic sentence. I just told you how to structure a topic sentence. You can get creative, it just needs to have that gist. You can have a transitional sentence into the content. Like you can present your mini argument, your mini thesis for that paragraph or that section. Then you have a support sentence. Then you have some more support sentences. These could be things like examples, facts, research findings, statistics, quotes, stories, etc. And then you have to actually go back and support that. So the format is, if you have a quote or a statistic or something like that, you introduce it, you present the quote, the statistic, or the story, or whatever, and then you follow it up with integrating it with your material. So there's kind of that back-to-back thing that can occur all in one sentence, or they could be multiple sentences. So it might go something like this. Each year, 200 children from the greater Chicago area are affected by asthma. According to a recent research study by the American Asthma Association, children living in the greater Chicago area would be greatly benefited by a reduction in off-gassing from local manufacturing plants. According to Dr. So-and-so, plants could simply filter 2% of their output per plant, and this would make a significant impact in the air quality in the greater Chicago area. And then you could follow it up with simply asking each of the manufacturing facilities to reduce their emissions output by 2% would not qualify as a significantly costly ask of them, and therefore this is a reasonable request with such a dramatic input or such a dramatic result. It should be seriously considered. So we've introduced it, we've given the information, and we've explained it or called to action, right? So we just don't go into a paragraph and then introduce something and then slap a quote in there and then move on to the next thing. So that's why I wanted to kind of clarify this. And then you have a transitional sentence that you end with so that you can go into your next body paragraph or body section. And we will cover this again. Don't worry, don't panic or hyperventilate when we cover bodies. But I want to give it to you now because, quite frankly, you need to know these things when you're writing a thesis statement, when you're trying to rough draft your introduction, because you need to know where you're going. If the introduction and your thesis statement are a roadmap for all these other things, you need to know where it is you're going to go. Conclusions are where you're going to end up, right? They're the last port on your cruise stop. So conclusions restate the thesis statement. You can either use the exact same wording or you can tweak it a little bit. So you always outline it. I like to, when I write essays, I like to use the comment bubbles and tag where my thesis statement is in my introduction. And then when I get to my conclusion, because I write them at the same time, my introduction and conclusion, I tag it there. And then I go through when I reverse outline and I make sure each point is covered throughout the body. I highlight it. And then I just, delete my comments and take the highlighting off before I turn it in. So conclusions, you're going to restate the thesis statement. You're going to make an important statement. This is where you do something like summarize the most important points. You want to keep this down to like 1 to 4 sentences. You could go longer, but for such short essays like you're going to be doing in this class, keep it to 1 to 4 sentences. You're going to make some important statements if you have any, just like you did before. You're going to have a closing remark.
Think of this like watching one of those talk shows like Jerry Springer, and they end with like a, an overreaching thought, or the moral of the story is, that you shouldn't cheat on people, etc. This is kind of your moment to shine and have a call to action, or a moral of the story is, or I really want to leave the audience with this thought. Remember, the last thing you say is going to be the lasting thought that your audience has. So this has got to be a powerful statement. Whatever your most powerful thought is from your entire essay, the overreaching thought, that should be your closing remark, your last sentence of your essay. So that's kind of an overview of the different formats of essay writing that we can use in this class and in most of your academic career for your undergraduate degree. Additionally, we've talked about thesis statements, introductory paragraphs, closing paragraphs, and then bodies, and what kind of makes up a paragraph. In the course, we will cover most of these things several times, but you need to understand the structure of an essay and how that structure is going to impact things like your thesis statement. Thank you for joining me. I look forward to seeing you on the discussion boards and throughout the course. If you have any questions, please feel free to send me an email or post it in your journal. I'll be happy to circle back with you, and have a great week.